Lin Daiyu is one of the most unforgettable characters in all of world literature. She's beautiful, intelligent, and overflowing with emotion. She can also be temperamental and cries through just about every scene she has in Dream of the Red Chamber. And the fascinating thing about Lin Daiyu is that she's really a three-dimensional character with nothing stereotypical about her. Now, she is three-dimensional because of her backstory and because of her complex motivations. We first encounter Lin Daiyu in Chapter 3 of the novel. You might wonder why it takes so long. After all, she's clearly one of the main characters of the book. Author Cao Shuiqin was the master of subverting expectations and deliberately held off on introducing any of his main characters until the third chapter. Well, sort of. You see, what the author Cao Shuiqin does with his characters in Dream of the Red Chamber is probably not the sort of thing that you want to do with your own writing. Anyway, poor Lin Daiyu's mother passes away right when we meet her. Her father decides that he cannot provide for her and sends her off to live with her mother's relatives. Now, this should strike you as strange. My understanding is that her father was concerned because he only had a single child, a girl, and was not planning on marrying again. With no son, there was no way for him to pass along his estate. And in such a weakened social position, he may have felt that his deceased wife's rich relatives would be better able to help Lin Daiyu find a suitable husband. That's one way of looking at it anyway. There's another possible interpretation. He might have sent her to live with the Jia family so that she could meet Baoyu. Now, Baoyu is another unforgettable character. Most Chinese television and movie productions paint him up as a kind of willful, childish playboy. Actually, his motivations are far more complex. There's this really wordy and boring segment in Chapter 2 that most people skip over where two unrelated characters discuss metaphysics. The basic idea here is that good and bad energy, or qi, sometimes mixes together in a single person. That person winds up becoming extremely eccentric. The implication is that Baoyu happens to be one of these characters, eccentric and anything but sensible. But of course, if you start digging in, you'll see a different story. Well, Baoyu famously prefers the company of women to men. And luckily for him, he happens to live a life of carefree luxury surrounded by dozens of absolutely beautiful girls. However, it seems that Baoyu's chief motivation comes from his strained relationship with his father, Jia. Jia represents a traditional Confucian form of sensibility and education. Rather than trying to understand his son, Jia instead prefers to beat some sense into him. Baoyu prefers the company of his grandmother, who dotes on him and naturally associates femininity with good and masculine with bad. In other words, it's incorrect to think of Baoyu as just some sort of incorrigible playboy. There's actually quite a bit of depth to his character. In fact, in a pretty obscure section in the first chapter, Baoyu and Lin Daiyu are presented as non-human entities in some sort of pre-Earth world. Baoyu is an anthropomorphic stone, and Lin Daiyu is a magical flower that springs to life because of magical dew that rolls off the back of the stone. When she becomes sentient, the flower realizes that she owes her life to the stone. So she decides entirely on her own to follow the stone when it goes to Earth to become human and vows to repay him with her tears. And so Lin Daiyu's character is defined by the tears that she constantly sheds. And it actually goes deeper than that. Lin Daiyu's name also implies a weeping beauty, and this is where the book starts to get really deep. There's an old poem called the Changhen Ge, or the Song of Everlasting Regret, by the famous Tang poet Baoyu. It's really long, I won't go through the whole thing. This phrase here is the key. Her jade countenance was sad and crisscrossed with tears, like a pear blossom bathed in springtime rain. These four characters here, Li Hua Dai Yu, are so famous that they became an idiom. The idiom refers to a weeping beauty in memory of that line from the poem. Notice the last two characters, Dai Yu, which is the same as Lin Daiyu's name. Now, I'm not just making this up. Cao Shuiqin does this with almost all of his characters. Everybody has a name that is somehow a play on words, and just about everybody has a name that refers back to some famous phrase or sentence somewhere in China's vast literary history. But as cool as all of that is, that really is not what makes his characters so memorable. No, it's the depth of their personalities. Lin Daiyu is far from the perfect woman. She constantly becomes jealous and she has a tendency to snap at others when things don't go the way she wants. And deep down inside, the trauma that Lin Daiyu has experienced makes her naturally distrust the world. Baoyu is obviously far from the ideal son. The story is all about the love triangle between Baoyu, Lin Daiyu, and Shui Baochai. And yet, Baoyu's first intimate experience is with a completely different character, and it happens in a way that's really scandalous. Baoyu's strained relationship with his father gives his character motivation and depth that you don't often see in fiction. He's not a hero, nor is he an anti-hero. He's really almost like an everyman character, somebody that is really easy to relate to. Now, at its heart, Dream of the Red Chamber is really a romance book. Or, to use the terminology of the time, it is a Caizi Jiaren story at its core. Caizi Jiaren means talented scholar and beautiful lady and was a common type of popular fiction during Cao Shuiqing's day. And believe it or not, Dream of the Red Chamber actually qualifies as a Caizi Jiaren book in many ways. You've got Lin Daiyu, that's the requisite beautiful girl, the Jiaren. You've got Baoyu, the requisite handsome scholar, or a Caizi from a prominent family. Lin Daiyu's mother is dead, which is another trope of the genre. These books usually open with an unexpected meeting between the two and love at first sight. This happens in Dream of the Red Chamber with its usual poetic flair. Most of the book is about trying to overcome the obstacles to marriage, the same as in the genre. Of course, Dream of the Red Chamber does not have the requisite happy ending. But, all in all, the plot structure is absolutely one of a Caizi Jiaren novel. Or, as I said, it's a romance book at its core, but it's also designed to subvert that romance drama. Now, I need to be clear about this. This is not a satire novel, even though some sections might feel like satire. It's subversive. That means that it looks like a normal romance book, and yet it does the opposite of what you would expect it to do. One of the ways that it subverts the genre is by having characters who are so complex and so well developed, or in other words, who are not stereotypes. Baoyu is not dedicated to his studies at all. In fact, he's hopeless when it comes to the imperial examinations. He's a great poet and is a genius, but he would much rather spend his time with the girls than do anything society wants him to do. Lin Daiyu is a beautiful woman, sure, but she doesn't always act in a beautiful way. The tears that she sheds are not just for decoration. They are actual tears, the result of being forced to live an uncomfortable life in a strange environment. And even the poetry of the book subverts our romantic expectations. The Caizi Jiaren genre is filled with romantic poetry as the stereotypical characters bond through their shared literary brilliance. That happens here, except that all the poetry associated with Lin Daiyu has this dark and ominous tone. Nowhere is that more apparent than in Chapter 5, where Lin Daiyu's eventual death is foretold right from the start. And the stereotypical love rival is anything but a villainous, awful character in Dream of the Red Chamber. In fact, Shui Baochai is a beautiful, talented, and socially graceful girl. In essence, she is the ultimate Confucian woman. In fact, in a proper Caizi Jiaren novel, Shui Baochai would be the beautiful woman or the heroine, and Lin Daiyu would likely be the villain. When I read what readers say about romantic fiction in our day, I see a lot of people complaining about how stereotypical the characters tend to be. So modern romance is filled with the strong, muscular men and weak, feminine, submissive women. And honestly, the authors of those books really do a disservice to their readers by sticking with those tropes. Baoyu, of course, is the exact opposite of the strong, muscular man. He likes flowers and poetry and wants to spend his time giggling with the girls. Despite her tears, Lin Daiyu is actually an incredibly strong character and is more than capable of standing up for herself. Shui Baochai is also a strong character and is absolutely brilliant and capable. She's far from the stereotypical characters of her day. In fact, every single female character in this book subverts stereotypical expectations, including the sort that you see in modern romance novels. The key to these characters, in my opinion, is that they have real motivation. Baoyu isn't motivated by beauty or duty alone. He's motivated by the strained relationship in his life with his father and the frustration that he feels at being the heir that his family depends on. Lin Daiyu's character is largely motivated by trauma, as well as this karmic debt that she got into before she was even born, a debt that I don't think she understands. And Shui Baochai does more than just play a role in this story. She's got her own concerns, her own worries, her own fears, and her own problems to think about. That's why these characters seem like real people. It's because the author treats them like real people. There are countless romance books out there. There were also quite a few Caizi Jiaren novels during the Ming and Qing dynasties. Most of those stereotypical books have long since been forgotten. Meanwhile, Dream of the Red Chamber is heralded as one of the greatest pieces of all of world literature, largely because of its characters. So just keep that in mind when you're writing your own fiction. I mean, do what you need to do to make a sale, sure, but just remember that the shelf life of stereotypes is much shorter than you think.